Andrew Bustamante opens by analyzing the FBI's notable silence on critical issues such as the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the murder of Charlie Kirk, and the partial release of Epstein files. He explains that this reticence stems from the structural division inherent within the U.S. government's branches, legislative, executive, and judicial, each with defined roles and checks on one another. The FBI, as part of the judicial branch, operates under strict parameters that limit its responsiveness to public or political pressure, especially from the president or Congress. This institutional design is meant to protect the rule of law, but often leads to distancing of responsibility and perceived opacity. Bustamante points out the complex interplay between these branches, noting that political appointments, such as Kash Patel's role as FBI director installed by the executive branch, create unique cross-pollination that blurs boundaries. He suggests that while political figures publicly demand transparency, like Trump's calls to release Epstein files, the FBI's judicial obligations mean they only release what is legally permissible, often heavily redacted, and typically to congressional committees rather than the general public. This dynamic fuels public speculation, mistrust, and accusations of secrecy or conspiracy. Bustamante observes that much of the FBI's perceived secrecy is less about malicious concealment and more reflective of incompetence and a lack of governmental communication expertise. He cites examples where the FBI and Kash Patel prematurely released details about arrests, which conflicted with local law enforcement's official information and led to public confusion. The mishandling of the Charlie Kirk case, wherein an innocent volunteer wrongly identified himself as a suspect in official channels, is a notable instance emblematic of procedural slip-ups. This rush to communicate at the speed of social media rather than measured institutional discretion has caused frustrations and raised questions about the leadership's fitness for their roles. Bustamante theorizes that Patel's reliance on informal tributes to comfort the public with non-standard vocabulary deviates from the cautious language typical of seasoned law enforcement professionals, undermining confidence in investigations. Highlighting the public's struggle with limited information on high-profile cases, Bustamante emphasizes the importance of patience and critical thinking. He explains that the public is often the last to be informed in professional, thorough investigations, a process designed to protect evidentiary integrity and ensure justice. The demand for immediate answers opens the floodgates to unchecked speculation and conspiracy theories. Bustamante offers an analogy of being caught in a fast-moving river, describing how people must learn to navigate the torrent of information rather than fight against the overwhelming flow. In an age where social media accelerates rumor and information alike, discerning fact from fiction requires deliberate, calm navigation. He underscores that emotional reactions to uncertainty often feed into the craving for closed narratives, which conspiracies readily provide. Delving into the specific cases of politically motivated violence, Bustamante contrasts the sophistication evident in some attempts with the crude execution of others. He assesses the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson as an amateur operation driven by individual motives, lacking coordination or professional support. Similarly, the killing of Charlie Kirk appears premeditated but amateurish, further supporting the idea that these acts stem from lone actors radicalized by ideology rather than foreign governments or clandestine groups. He acknowledges the possibility of peripheral collaboration or shared extremist beliefs, but finds no reliable evidence of direct involvement by foreign powers or highly organized domestic networks. This assessment challenges narratives suggesting coordinated conspiracies behind these murders. Bustamante critiques the tendency to oversimplify complex events into grand conspiracies, citing the example of commentator Candace Owens' claims involving Israeli involvement in these events. While recognizing her intelligence and intent, he argues Owens' assertions lean toward conspiratorial interpretation unsupported by verified evidence. Bustamante explains how conspiracies often flourish when factual incidents are followed by prolonged information vacuums, creating open loops that the human mind struggles to accept. He advocates for distinguishing between objective facts and subjective opinions, stressing the need for corroborated evidence from multiple independent sources before placing credence in any narrative. Bustamante views much conspiracy theorizing as circular reporting with limited factual basis, a dynamic that erodes genuine understanding. Addressing claims about Israel's Mossad orchestrating assassinations such as Charlie Kirk's, Bustamante contextualizes Israeli intelligence within realistic operational priorities. While acknowledging Mossad's notable history of highly precise and long-term operations against existential enemies like Hezbollah and Hamas, he questions the leap to assuming such resources would be allocated to neutralize political threats in the U.S. with the same intensity. He emphasizes the risk-reward calculus that Israeli leadership and intelligence agencies must undertake, highlighting blowback risks, including damaged diplomatic ties and loss of intelligence-sharing partnerships if illicit actions were exposed. Bustamante posits it is far more likely that domestic security lapses or lone actors are responsible for incidents such as Kirk's murder, fitting Occam's razor better than complex conspiracy hypotheses. Bustamante reflects on historical and contemporary socio-political biases, particularly anti-Semitism, contextualizing them as recurring responses rooted in economic anxiety and fear. He speaks about the human mind's preference for anger over fear, noting anger's psychological function as a focused, mobilizing emotion. This dynamic often channels economic or social insecurities into vilification of visible minorities or scapegoats. He recommends studying the cultural and communal strengths of Jewish communities, referencing literature that attributes their success to strong communal ties, mutual support, and commitment to serving local needs rather than insularity or self-interest. Bustamante also stresses the crucial distinction between Judaism as a faith and Israel as a nation-state, warning against conflating the two when interpreting events and policies. One core segment of the discussion examines Jeffrey Epstein's complex status as a covert informant within FBI operations. Bustamante explains the utility of bad actors who engage in criminal activities yet provide access to larger, more dangerous networks of illegal conduct. Epstein's cooperation, under legal immunity, offered the justice system pathways to target higher-level figures and dismantle entrenched criminal political webs. The FBI's dual mandate, balancing law enforcement with national security, often leads to pragmatic compromises, shielding certain individuals to protect intelligence sources and ongoing investigations. Bustamante argues that understanding Epstein's role as a CI clarifies his unusual legal treatment and provides perspective on the incomplete nature of publicly available files. Bustamante challenges the official narrative of Epstein's suicide while in prison, citing biomechanical improbabilities and contextual attitudes regarding his likely mental state. Drawing from his experience counseling incarcerated wealthy clients, he notes that while despair is common, the physical circumstances of Epstein's death raise serious doubts. Bustamante inclines to the theory that Epstein was violently attacked or killed rather than having died by his own hand, though specifics remain unclear. He underscores the protective priorities of law enforcement to maintain informant confidentiality, adding that disclosure of Epstein's precise role could jeopardize broader intelligence networks. This operational discretion contributes to the ongoing mystery and public dissatisfaction over incomplete transparency. Bustamante unpacks how the push and pull between legislative, executive, and judicial branches shapes the flow of information regarding high-profile investigations. For example, even when Congress votes to release documents like the Epstein files, the judicial branch and Department of Justice control which parts are ultimately seen, heavily redacted to protect ongoing cases and national security interests. Consequently, the public often receives only fragments sufficient to maintain appearances without compromising sensitive operations. He highlights the political theater where executives, like President Trump, signal demands for openness but tactically shift responsibility to Congress or the FBI, a maneuver preserving plausible deniability and control. This interplay results in red herrings that sustain public demand without substantive disclosure. Shifting from domestic U.S. issues to international geopolitics, Bustamante contends that the focus on Venezuela as a hub of narco-terrorism and political instability is a deliberate red herring. He emphasizes Venezuela's relatively minor role in drug trafficking into the U.S. compared to Mexico and Colombia, suggesting the U.S. military presence in the Caribbean is more about countering Chinese expansionism than fighting drugs. He details China's strategic leases on ports, rare earth mineral rights, and amphibious capabilities in Latin America, positioning Venezuela as a proxy battleground in a broader Cold War-like conflict. Bustamante surmises that the U.S. naval actions near Venezuela serve as messaging in a shadow war aimed at containing China's growing influence. Bustamante culminates with an extensive analysis of the current geopolitical rivalry with China, framing it as a nuanced rice war rather than a traditional Cold War, given the intertwined economies of the U.S. and China. Under Xi Jinping's leadership, China has modernized rapidly, developing technological and military capabilities and asserting global ambitions, including Taiwan's reunification by 2027 as a key objective. He predicts China will likely accomplish this through administrative means similar to Hong Kong's absorption, rather than overt military invasion, leaving the U.S. to respond diplomatically rather than militarily to avoid economic repercussions. Bustamante warns the U.S. must accelerate efforts to solidify technological independence, such as domestic chip manufacturing, or face long-term declines in global influence. The outcome hinges on managing economic interdependence while maintaining geopolitical strength.